Injuries suck. And we saw injuries put straight on display in this Eagles Browns preseason game. The Browns, they didn't seem to have any injuries, but the Eagles, they had a bunch of injuries. Nolan Smith had a bit of a shoulder scare. Everyone was like, whoa, I hope he's okay. He was kind of grabbing at his upper arm. People were like, I hope it's not dislocated. I hope it's not broken. It wasn't. From what we know, he was smiling off the field, but people were like, "Oh, that's just how he is. He's a smiley looking guy." But he seemed to be fine. The Eagles cornerback Zek Zek McPherson, I think that's what his name is. He's like a fourth string cornerback. He got injured batting down a ball that almost got intercepted by a D lineman. He ruptured his Achilles, just like I think it was Sean Bradley the week before against Baltimore. And then the Eagles had a wide receiver get kind of like a neck slash spinal injury, and then they got like a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman who had it was a defensive lineman who had a similar injury because a linebacker went right into him while trying to make this huge tackle on Kellen Mond, who just evaded everybody to run for a first down that should have been an easy sack, but it wasn't. The youngsters couldn't get it. But injuries are not good. And that you always go into the preseason with the thought process of, well, we want to evaluate our talent, but we also don't want our starters to go into the season rusty, right? That's the only reason why you would play your starters, because maybe you have new players on the team. Maybe you want your guys to kind of get in the swing of things early, have some time on the field, get them acclimated to game speed, even if it's not against starters. But the Eagles aren't going that route. And I don't know if I 100% agree with that way of thinking. I definitely understand it. You just don't want your players to be rusty. But at the same time, the Eagles just gave Jalen Hurts a big contract. The Eagles have certain all-pros and pro bowlers who are either aging or possibly injury prone, and you don't want to get them injured. So I definitely understand the other side of the picture. There are a lot of teams who go into the preseason, they don't play any of their starters. Like, I don't expect the Vikings to be playing Kirk Cousins. I don't expect the Jets to be playing Aaron Rodgers, or I don't know if they did play Aaron Rodgers, but I don't expect them to do that. I don't expect I don't expect a lot of these better teams to go in playing their starters, because I know that they don't want to get these guys injured. You know, the Dallas Cowboys aren't going to come into a game and play Dak Prescott because they don't want to get the guy injured. They don't want to worry about that, because they remember back in 2016 when they played Tony Romo in a meaningless preseason game against Seattle, and he injured himself. Now, luckily, they had a guy like Dak Prescott who was good enough to come in and lead that team, and has been a good quarterback, a really good top 10 quarterback, almost year in and year out. They're very fortunate to have him, but not every team has a guy like that who kind of comes out of nowhere and can end up being the starter and end up being the future of the team. So I can definitely see the other side of that coin, but hindsight's 2020. If week 1 comes around and the starters are not playing well, that could be why. And the Eagles playing the Patriots, it's definitely a winnable ball game. But if you see the starters struggling and you see them unfocused because they've been sitting on the sideline all preseason, that might be why. You might look back at the season and be like, hey, that's why we're 9-8 instead of maybe 11-6 or 12-5. You know what I'm saying? So there is no true science to the preseason. There is no true science to keeping your players in or taking them out. But, however history is going to write itself is how it's going to write itself. but you definitely don't want your players to be rusty for week 1, and you don't want all your players to be injured for week 1. The Eagles have been very fortunate to the point where these guys getting injured are either like special teams players or backups. So that's not good in terms of depth. They're definitely going to have to find somebody to fill those roles during the season. But you would much rather that you'd much rather sacrifice a backup than sacrifice a Pro Bowler or a possible All Pro player or a high end starter who's just not in that tier yet. You would much rather sacrifice one of those other guys. It's kind of like a back in I would watch like Mad TV, or I would know about situations in sports, right? Like if you have a player who is doing like steroids or something like that, the coach will say like, oh, the fourth string quarterback, pop positive for whatever, so you can save your guy. It's kind of like one of those situations, except for injuries are just way bigger than that. And it was very unfortunate to see those guys go down, because how depth is important. How at the end of the season, when the Philadelphia Eagles were starting Jack Stoll and Grant Calcaterra, and I forget the back of the cornerback who was replacing Avonte Maddox, and they were playing Reed Blankenship. You want to have those good depth guys, and you don't want to have these guys who really can't do anything. So injuries stink. They are part of the game in the sense of, at the end of the season, everybody's going to be sore. Everyone's going to be hurting. But at the same time, it's the team with the least amount of injuries, that can impact skilled players. You'd rather have most of them, and that is going to help you go further in the playoffs than a team where almost everyone is injured. Now, does that mean that the healthiest team always wins the Super Bowl? No, that's not true at all. There have been some truly unhealthy teams that win the Super Bowl. The last one that I can remember is the Philadelphia Eagles in 2017. The New York Giants in 2007 were just injured all across the board in many different positions. I seem to remember Jeremy Shockey being injured. I seem to remember multiple members of their defensive backfield was injured, cornerbacks and safeties. So it's not a true science, but it's fan philosophy. My philosophy is that I don't want injured players, but my philosophy is also that I don't want rusty players. So it's just whatever you personally believe. That is your personal philosophy. It's not good to see backup players get injured, and you don't want to see anybody get injured, but you definitely don't want to see a starter or even a backup get injured. So you see that stuff happen, you say to yourself, that's why we're not playing our guys in the preseason. And again, I don't know if I 100% agree with it, but I can definitely respect it from the perspective of a fan, not even knowing what's going to happen during the season, because I don't have a crystal ball.